Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. The Indian Air Force has a fighter aircraft problem. It has too few fighter jets. Its threats are growing. China and Pakistan are beefing up their air power, and the Indian Air Force is shrinking. The IAF has been sanctioned 42 fighter aircraft squadrons. Now each squadron has 18 fighter aircraft. That's over 700 fighter jets in all. But the IAF today has just 31 fighter squadrons. That's just over 550 aircraft. That's a shortfall of nearly 200 aircraft. And this shortfall is going to increase in the years ahead because older aircraft like the MiG-21s and the MiG-29s are being retired. Less than 100 fighter jets have been acquired over the last decade. There are other serious concerns. The IAF was to get the indigenous light combat aircraft Tejas from HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, at the rate of 16 aircraft a year. But these deliveries have been delayed. And one of the reasons for this delay is that the LCA is powered by the US-made GE 404 jet engine. The US has delayed deliveries of these engines. The Su-30 MKI, built by the Russian Federation, is the backbone of the IAF. There are 272 such aircraft in service, which began to be inducted over 2 decades ago. But the project to upgrade them has yet to begin. The Air Force is in a crisis, whichever way you look at it. Now on Monday, Defence Secretary Rajesh Kumar Singh submitted a report to Defence Minister Rajnath Singh. The Empowered Committee for Capability Enhancement, which the Defence Secretary heads, has made certain recommendations to the government. The contents of this report have not been made public, but they broadly suggest a plan of action for the IAF. The recommendation that we know of is that the private sector needs to be roped in to complement efforts of the DPSUs and the DRDO. In fact, Air Chief Marshal AP Singh's speech at the Chanakya Dialogues last week suggests this course of action. Let's listen in.
We need to accelerate this pace. We've done an exercise in-house study. We need to actually produce or induct aircraft at the rate of almost 2 squadrons per year to cater for the ramped up numbers that we want, plus whatever is going to go out very soon. We have a lot of fleets which are, another 5 to 10 years we'll have to phase them out. So those fleets have to be filled up also, plus we already have vacancies available. So it means we are looking at something like 35 to 40 aircraft a year being produced somewhere. So those capacities, I understand, cannot come up overnight, but we need to start pushing ourselves towards that. Now, like LCA Mark 1A production, HAL has promised that from next year onwards, we will have 24 aircraft being made per year. So I'm very happy with that. If we're talking about 24 aircraft of Mark 1A plus some Sukhois or some other aircraft, so we are looking at numbers like 30 per year possible by HAL alone. Along with that, if you have some private player coming in, we have a very good model of transport aircraft at least at the moment, C295. If some private industry comes in for a make in India, let's say, we add another maybe 12 to 18 aircraft per year from their side. So we are reaching that number. So that is possible.
Joining me on the News9 Plus show now are Air Marshal Mateshwaran, Jayant Damodar Patil and Saurav Jha. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Air Marshal Mateshwaran, it's very unusual for a single service report to be submitted to the government in an era when we are talking of jointmanship and joint commands and theatre commands. How badly are the fighter numbers looking for the Indian Air Force right now?
Thank you, Sandeep. Thanks for getting me on this program. Very happy to be here. Well, as far as the fighter numbers are concerned, I must say, to put it bluntly, it's quite bad. 31 squadrons where you have to be 42.5, and that 42.5 was in an environment that was sanctioned almost 25 years ago. And today, you'll probably have to revise even that number, given our trajectory as a country in the international order. So 31 squadrons, you're just about managing to remain slightly above the Pakistan, the adversary on the west. And what about dealing with the north? So while we can manage with what we have in terms of deterring and then holding positions, but that's not the way I think you should be looking at. And we've been at this declining game in terms of numbers for more than 20 years now. So we have a painfully long acquisition process, and our manufacturing and indigenization process has been extremely slow. And all that is actually forcing the Air Force's hand now. And without an air power being on strong wicket, you got serious problems. I mean, you can have the largest army, you can have a huge navy as well.
Yes.
But without air power and aerospace power, you'll all be sitting ducks.
Absolutely.
And we need to realize that.
You know, a quick follow-on question, Air Marshal Mateshwaran. You mentioned that all these circumstances have forced the Air Force's hand. When you say that, are you referring to the Air Chief's remarks recently at the Aero India?
Not just Aero India. I think ever since he's taken over, I think he's been quite transparent, quite blunt, if I want to put it, realistically. And he's been calling what the real state is, rather than saying something which the political leadership will be happy to hear. It's important that the political leadership gets the real ground situation and what it looks like, because you can't overnight fill up everything. It's going to take another 2 decades for you to catch up.
Right.
And therefore, the urgency of making them understand what is the grave situation. I think he's been doing it quite well. Very
right.
well.
He's been calling a spade. But I want to bring in Mr. Jayant Damodar Patil, who's part of one of India's largest engineering conglomerates, Larsen and Toubro. Mr. Patil, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you.
The Air Chief has been talking about getting the private sector involved as well. Now, the private sector has been involved in the aerospace segment, but not as prime contractors. Do you see an opportunity here for the private sector? For instance, L&T, would you be looking at entering the aircraft manufacturing game?
Sandeep, I want to take you a little back in history. The Kelkar committee actually talked of, the RURs, the champions, and the champions were supposed to be created in every segment that we are discussing, including the aircrafts.
Right.
Obviously, as per Kelkar committee, they're supposed to have been 20 years back created a parallel to every PSU.
Yes.
We know that this didn't happen. We also know when the strategic partnership, because of the kind of scenarios Marshal Mateshwaran very rightly talked about.
Yes.
So strategic partnership model by itself actually intended private sector to be brought in. And we know that this has not happened. And of course, for good reasons, that our own aircraft is getting produced not just in the first 40, the next 89, the next 97 in pipeline. And of course, there's going to be an AMCA to follow. So there's a large amount of indigenous aircrafts, which is actually a happy situation if they were getting produced. I'm sure the way Air Force has supported this program, it would have been amazing to get them in the required kind of numbers. And the engine non-availability, which you very rightly pointed out as a reason, the non-availability of engine is something which is again and again reminding us that we should be Atmanirbhar in many areas.
Yes.
If we are Atmanirbhar, probably we will not discuss this issue today.
Right.
As to whether Larsen Toubro is interested, based on the Kelkar committee's recommendation, when the agro replacement program came, that was the first time ever, beyond HAL, there was a requirement of somebody from private sector to come up, and we were a bidder.
Right.
And obviously history has it that we are not given the first extension that we asked. And of course, as a result, the program went to Airbus and thereafter Tata's make it. As and when that kind of a need comes in, there was a serious debate on the future fighter production to be on a model, something similar to what we know for the underwater classified program.
Yes.
And headquarters similar to that, being actually in a way run by 3-star officers who come out of the Air Force. And this is exactly was the model which was about to go to CCS.
Yes.
And a whole lot of us had spent time on this model to be created.
Right.
So obviously, if there was a truly a need. And what I
Yes.
actually read out of the Air Chief's statement now,
Yes.
now the shoe is beyond pinching.
Yes.
If the beyond pinching, obviously, then there's kind of an urgent action which is needed, and hopefully this urgent action first may actually enhance the role which private sector is already playing on LCA.
Yes.
Second, there's always a possibility of involving a second company in addition to the HAL.
Right, absolutely. The shoe is pinching now, and that's the reason the Air Force Chief has spoken out the way he has repeatedly over the last couple of days. I want to go over to Saurav Jha. Saurav, as a defense analyst, there seem to be, deeper unresolved issues here. There is a number crunch, without a doubt. But is there also an issue of planning here, not anticipating delays of programs, acquisition programs that have fallen by the wayside, like the MMRCA program that Air Marshal Matheswaran was a part of over a decade ago? Those programs have not been supplemented by indigenous efforts. What's the problem here when it comes to these numbers that we're looking at today?
As far as perspective planning is concerned, documents exist, like there's an LTIPP, there are those 5 service acquisition plans as well. The real issue is that you have to understand how the military industrial, or rather manufacturing itself works. If you do not show enough commitment to something, then the supply chain will not be enthused. We are talking about let's talk about the Tejas program.
Yes.
What was ordered till for the longest time? 20 in 2006 and 20 more in 2010. Even if HAL had committed to whatever schedule it did to the Air Force, the fact is the signal that was sent out to industry was that nobody's really that interested in this program. It's
Right.
only when you had, the standard of preparation 2018 finally becoming the Tejas Mark 1A, and you have 83 units on order, and now 97 more units are projected, that
Right.
there is this enthusiasm. There are people who want to come forward, etc. This whole issue of exploring another line in the private sector is nothing new. It has been talked of since 2015 at least.
Yes.
But the private sector, even the biggest conglomerates in India, were
Yes.
never really clear about the risk sharing model, or
Yes.
whether orders will actually come through. So that is the other thing. Now, as far as what the Air Chief Marshal is saying, he's basically referring to the strategic partnership model, which is already enshrined in the defense acquisition procedure. So there's no real need for a kerfuffle here. All you need to do is you have 2 options. You proceed with the MRFA program, which is what the MMRCA, which project which never dies, actually comes back in different avatars,
Right.
as you know. So you have the MRFA, you get that done via a private partner. It's
Yeah.
not exactly like the buy and make of C295. In this case,
Right.
there has to be much more TOT, much greater IC levels, etc. And yes, in the future, when you make the AMCA, you can have 2 lines subject to the orders. Now, if you're going to order 120 AMCA, do not expect that 2 lines will make sense, one with a DPSU and one with the private sector, right? You have to look at the numbers that we are faced against. Somebody talked about, the whole thing will take 20 years to catch up. Exactly. So in those 20 years, you need to have a mindset where you're going to say, this is the only option. I'm going to build this in numbers. I am depending on my country's capability and its wits and its, and its international connections to make it happen. This
Right.
is how the Chinese made it happen. This is how the Americans made it happen. And although the Russians were denied technology for the longest time in the Soviet Union, they had this perspective. They used to fill that international connection part in a slightly different manner, if you
Right.
put it that way. Okay.
Right,
So
absolutely.
That's what I'll say.
The numbers. It's all about the numbers, as you were saying, but I want to go to Air Marshal Matheswaran, on this very core issue, if I can put it that, what Mr. Patil also mentioned is the fact that we don't have an engine of our own. We're dependent either on the Americans or on the Russians. Our own indigenous engine hasn't really taken off. The Kaveri, it has thrust to weight ratio issues. Given the fact that, as you mentioned, the Air Force is possibly the only service whose role impacts all 3 services, not just the Air Force. It affects the outcome of the land battle. It affects the maritime sphere as well. Is there a case for an all-of-nation approach to get that Kaveri engine going and finally get it, successful? As Mr. Patil was mentioning, to take a leaf out of the strategic submarine program where you had a very focused group directly working under the PMO. Do you think that is the model to get the Kaveri engine going?
Certainly, Sandeep, but I want to just clarify a few issues there. In the context of naval platforms, we've started working and setting up certain underlying strengths evolving right from the time of independence. You see, the naval architecture was an integral division of the Navy. And therefore, they were able to actually guide the DRDO as well as the industries, as well as the research institutions to be able to build certain capabilities. That's one. Second is in aerospace domain, you have had an orientation which put everything in the public sector. That is, HAL was the only agency that was available. And you have HAL. There's no other industry in the world that exists like HAL with so many divisions.
Right.
And each of those divisions can be an independent industry by itself.
Right.
But they're all centrally controlled by a central umbrella organization in Bangalore. Correct? That itself brings in a lot of inefficiencies in the whole process. That's a different topic. I'll touch upon it later. But for aero engine, any country that aspires to be a leading power in the international order,
yes,
you have no options out. You have to develop that capability.
Right.
But in the entire aerospace domain, aero engine is a very, very complex development process.
Yes.
And even for China, which is reverse engineered an engine and flew its first engine in the late 50s or early 60s, it managed to overcome most of its problems only now, that is in this decade. The WS-10 and WS-15 are now finally powering as the main engines in their leading fighters, right? So it takes such a long time because nobody gives you access to the database, nobody gives you, they will handhold you to do license production.
Right.
We produce 5,000 engines plus in Korapat.
Yes.
But ask them to reverse engineer, reproduce an engine, it's going to be a tough call. So that is one part. So it's a very complex and it needs all of a nation approach and a very strategic approach to have continuity in the research and development process. Unfortunately, that was lacking. And
Right.
Kaveri engine is a good effort, but then you must remember that we jumped without actually establishing fundamental steps. You want to make a fourth generation aero engine without having had any aero engine designed, even a basic 20 kilonewton one or even a 10 kilonewton
Yes.
one flying anywhere. So obviously you're going to have a problem. Besides that, we did not have complete control on metallurgy and many
Yes.
other areas. And therefore, notwithstanding all that, it's still a great effort to have done, but you still have another 20 years of work to go.
Right. You still
my
have another
estimate- in my
20
estimate.
years to go for the Kaveri engine. That's a very bleak assessment.
No, it's not about
Mr.
the
Patil.
engine per se.
Yes.
It's about mastering the aero engine technology capability.
Jayant Patil, tell us where the private sector can come in on this, where the Kaveri engine development. The private sector has been has been a key partner in the strategic submarine program. What are the lessons that you can bring in from that to get this Kaveri engine program off the ground, given how critical it is really? It's the heart of the matter for all our fighter engine programs.
Sandeep, I am a firm believer that we should not get bogged down by that it is going to take longer time.
Right.
Someday we need to start. And of course, if we have more efficient models, the like we just discussed,
Yes.
we actually can make it happen much faster.
Right.
And it cannot be done by any one organization. And as Marshal Matheswaran very rightly said, it is all of nation.
Yes.
We need DRDO there, we need the user there, we need the industry there, and all of them, public, private, all of them need to be coming in to pool what they know best. Because unless we are actually able to bring all that together, we are
Yes.
not going to be able to create and sort of accelerate it on time. Of course, the scenario is we do have very close to a 4.5 ton thrust engine today. To take it to what is needed, let's say for AMCA, 110, 130 kilonewtons, so let's say 13 tons, we need to go through a very serious process of upgrading.
Right.
And it is a lot to do with the metallurgy, a lot to do with the surface treatments. And individually, if I start looking at some of the elements and pieces of it, whole lot of us in industry do something or the other.
Right.
3D printing need to be very, very in a big way leveraged today. And this
Right.
is something where the industries who actually are producing metal parts 3D.
Right.
We ourselves within Larsen to Bro produce on powder bed fusion. We do produce with wire wound kind of scenario.
Yes. Yes.
Can actually melt wire and build parts. And so same thing you can do with laser and metal powders. So amazing levels of, I would say, advancements as compared to when we were talking of when Kaveri began as a
Yes.
first program. Today, of course, we can possibly accelerate. All that we require is a kind of a freedom to put industry together, to empower to some extent without going into that L1 syndrome,
Right.
pick people on merit, and of
Yes.
course, you can expect something will happen. May not be for a decade. My take is we minimum require a decade. Something beyond that is
Yes.
a matter of efficiency to which we are able to allow people to perform.
Right, absolutely. At least a decade, and the public sector could come in on this to reduce, timelines. And thought just occurred to me, Mr. Patil, that what you really are talking about is a double-engine Sarkar to get the Kaveri engine project going. The Sarkar in this case being the Indian Air Force, which so badly needs those engines. But over to you, Saurav Jha. What about force multipliers? The Air Force seems to have the smallest ratio of air-to-air refuelers and AWACS, possibly to fighter aircraft, for any major Air Force. In the short term, do you see the Air Force pitching in for more AWACS, long-range missiles, and more refuelers, and getting the kind of capabilities that will give it more bang for the buck with the numbers of squadrons that it has, 30, 31?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you talk about, what do you do when you have a suboptimal scenario, when you have a situation where you have a shortfall in squadron strength, obviously you start looking at ISR and C4I star in general. You
Yes.
look at leveraging those elements. So you need more AVACs. You have AEW and C Mark 1A, which is basically based on that Embraer platform itself, 6 of those. Then 6 more based on which will be the Netra Mark II, which is a very, very modern system, by the way.
Right.
Let's not go into details. Those, then you can have, you can use. There is a collaborative JV that exists between HAL and another entity, and that can be used to, quickly set up a whole park of refuelers as well, based on essentially commercial aircraft bodies, right?
Right.
Or even maybe something like the 767. Even as you wait for the bespoke sort of air refueler based on an A330, etc. So there are those options, and those need to be expedited. Here, obviously, the usually sclerotic procurement process has to just get off the chair, as it were, and move quicker. The other thing that needs to be done, and which can be readily leveraged, and where
Yes.
Indian industry and the Air Force and the military in general and the R&D, the R&D base led by DRDO is in sync, is the use of missile technology for setting up an integrated air and missile defense system. You
Right.
can set up a super dense air and missile defense system with what you already have, and set up an integrated rocket force for prosecuting targets. In any case, you need that, as the Ukraine war has shown.
Yes.
Ukraine does not have any kind of an air force that can stand up to the Russians, but the fact is the Russians were not able to establish air superiority, and that is
Right.
precisely because they leveraged what they could get, Patriots and ATACMs, right? So
Right.
integrated rocket force and air defense command and those refuelers and those AWACS and general network centric elements, and the space leg, which also you can push forward, because there's no point in talking about ISR when you
Yes.
only talk about the atmosphere. You need to leverage the ultimate high ground, which the Chinese are already leveraging, by the way.
Yes.
They are now a near peer adversary to the Americans in that domain. So
Right.
those are the elements we need to look at, even as we build up our manned fighter strength, as it were.
Absolutely. Air Marshal Matheswaran, your views on this. How do we, compensate for these holes that we have in our fighter strength, manned fighter strength? By what are the kind of capabilities you would like the Air Force to go in for hell for leather in the next couple of years to make up for this shortfall? The fighters will eventually come, but like you were saying, it would take probably a decade or so. In the short term, what can the Air Force do to leverage its, mastery over all these domains?
Yeah, as George said, I think we need to go very aggressively on building UAVs. What, if anything, Ukraine war has shown is the value of unmanned aerial platforms
Right.
and autonomous systems. So I think we need to go full bore on that in developing. There is a lot of indigenous capability, I think, that's developing right now within the country. That's one part. But weapons, need to get complete control over all aspects of sensor technologies with respect to weapons.
Right.
And therefore, I think we are already working on hypersonic weapons. So, like the Chinese have a rocket force, we have a full-fledged, which is what we recommended as early as 2009 from the Indian Air Force.
Right.
Move ahead on the similar model of creating an integrated air defense system with a rocket force completely. So these are areas I think we need to work. But besides that, what you pointed out is force multipliers are absolutely essential in significant numbers.
Right.
With just 3 AWACS and 3 Netras or 6 Netras is not adequate for us for the airspace and the strategic interests that we need to defend. And therefore, they need to come in bigger numbers as well. But there is the technology issue that gets involved.
Right.
But also, we must remember that, as was pointed out, the Ukrainians had the advantage of giving them complete situation awareness
Yes.
from the West and the Americans in terms of space-based intelligence and the weapons, and the European Union's-based complete, NATO-based complete information with respect, keeping them state on a realistic, real-time basis knowledge. And therefore, it was an asymmetric, battle that they fought with respect to air defense, and they were actually able to put the Russians away for quite a while, significantly.
Right.
The air war is largely it's the hypersonic missile war and drone war in Ukraine because of these limitations or these advantages to one side.
Right.
But these are areas I think we can build significantly. And here you're not constrained. But notwithstanding all that, some of the slowness that have taken place in acquisitions is ultimately it's all about finance. And this you give funding in time and adequately. The pace at which certain acquisitions and developments will take place will always get an effect.
Absolutely. Need for acquiring more force multipliers, including missiles, drones, and of course air refuelers. That's a critical need. But Jayant Patil, tell us about where the private sector can step in and help the Air Force with all of these capabilities. This double-engine Sarkar model, how can it work for the Indian Air Force to meet its requirements, like Air Marshal Matheswaran mentioned, the hypersonic missiles, your sensors, your refuelers, all of those platforms?
Sandeep, you are aware that a whole lot of weaponry, DRDO's developments across weapons, especially the missiles, has very, very deep engagement with private sector. So is the case in case of the long-range radars. And we now today see that we can keep expanding our umbrella to much, much longer ranges. That's something which, again, besides what Bell had been doing, some of the private sector companies are doing that. Now, once the transparency comes in, you actually know where things are. I think another domain which I believe very firmly that soon, with the space sector having been opened, we will start having enormous amount of space-based assets to be able to provide information in the airspace as well as on ground. And this is something which will start making enormous amount of difference. Given maybe 5 to 10 years kind of a horizon, we'll have very large number of sensors up in the sky or beyond the sky, if I may actually use that phrase. Once you have those assets, your need to fly multiple sorties will actually come down. Second, the moment we are able to take the unmanned segment into the man-unmanned teaming, your fighters don't really have to run into the danger. They can stay far more behind, and the unmanned soldier actually then can possibly move ahead, taken out a man out of the loop. He operates it either from a flying body or from ground, and much more effectiveness in terms of what we want to do can be achieved with that transparency being available right from up above. This is a domain in which obviously, again, like you use that phrase, we need everybody coming together.
Right.
This is a domain wherein the infotech part of it comes in. The amount of progress that India enjoys, being the info capital of the world, comes in, and of course, along with that, some super algorithms and good brains need to come in. And that's essentially where I think what Saurav said makes enormous amount of sense. if there's a continuity visible,
Yes,
of course, people will flock in.
right. Absolutely. Continuity visible, then people will flock in, and that seems to be one of the reasons why the private sector doesn't seem to have been very much interested, Mr. Patil, in the orders, given this meager amount of orders that were placed on the LCA, as sort of pointed out. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening to talk about the IAF's air emergency and what needs to be done on priority. Thank you very much, Saurav Jha, Air Marshal Matheshwaran, and of course, Jayant Patil.
Thank you.
Last December, a report in the Washington Post accused 2 Indians of a plot to overthrow the government in Maldives. The newspaper alleged that Savio Rodriguez and Shirish Thorat attempted to overthrow President Muizu's government. The plot was to bribe 40 Maldivian MPs to vote out the Muizu government. This report has been denied by India's Ministry of External Affairs. Savio and Shirish have denied it as well. But they have collaborated on another plot, a book plot, and that book is called Codename Lucifer. This book talks about a fictitious operation to eliminate terrorists inside Pakistan using unknown gunmen. And they're both on the show with us tonight. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you for having us over.
Savio, Shirish,
Thank you.
I have to ask you this, why this book? Codename Lucifer, it eerily mirrors what's going on in Pakistan right now.
Well, let me be brutally honest with you, and I think the people of India must know about the fact that India has many soldiers without uniform that are working to keep India safe from anti-national elements, predominantly terrorists, that have been targeting India time and again. And therefore, a message has to be sent out to the people who are terrorists, number one, and to the people of the country that there are soldiers without uniform who are sacrificing their lives, and we must know about them. We must tell their story. Unfortunately, we cannot name any of them because of their identities, but we can at least pay a tribute to them in a fictional manner to the story that we are bringing out with Codename Lucifer.
Right, a tribute to India's unknown soldiers who can't be named, of course, for various reasons. But, you know, Shirish, over to you. You're the author of A Ticket to Syria, which was adapted into the OTT series Family Man. Now, what's common between Codename Lucifer and A Ticket to Syria? My mistake, The Freelancer. It was adapted into The Freelancer. What's common between these two books? I see a lot of, covert, black plots, all of those kind of stuff which intelligence agencies don't like to talk about a lot. How much of your book, especially this one, is based on reality?
As you know that I have been in the private military sector for almost about 2 decades right now. And we do hear through the grapevine rumblings, or if somebody reaches out for a search and locate, or if for a pop and drop assignment.
Right.
And we put together these small nuggets of information. We came up, me and Savio came up with this book. So I would say it's substantially based in fact and augmented by our experiences in that area.
Right. A fact backed with experiences in their areas, and that's something else that's, it's just raised a lot of, interest in what you just said. The fact that Pakistan has been claiming, at least since 2024, that India has something to do with all of these extrajudicial and extraterritorial killings inside Pakistan. Of course, the government of India has denied that. Their allegations, according to the MEA. But, the fact that given your backgrounds, that Savio, you're a member of the BJP, Shirish, you're a former cop, a former Goa policeman, now you're in the private military sphere. Does this kind of play up to Pakistan's allegations that India has something to do with the killing of its nationals? Hey, look, there are 2 people here, there are 2 gentlemen here who've come out with a book which is eerily similar to what's going on right now inside Pakistan.
Our sources tell us that it is actually Baluchi elements and Afghan elements, the Taliban, who are actually getting back at the Pakistani terrorist outfit groups,
Right.
three main groups which are there. And it's but natural that the ISI will put a different spin on
Right.
things. But that's not to take away from the fact that people who have inflicted grievous emotional and psyche wounds on India, like from the 1993 bombings to the 26/11 Taj terror attacks,
Yes.
there are people who have committed treason, terrorist acts in India and are now languishing in comfort in, say, be it Canada or London, Switzerland, or even America. And
Right.
these people need to be brought to justice. A message has to go out that no matter where you are, we will get you. You will face the wrath of the government of India.
Right. And you know, I just remembered, Shirish, that you also written that book called The Scout on David Headley more than a decade ago. A quick follow-on question to that. Were you angry and frustrated as a policeman, knowing that, you know, all of this was being conducted so brazenly? The fact that David Headley could walk in and out of the country, plan, plot, carry out this 26/11 attack, backed by the Pakistan deep state, and we seem to do nothing about it over a decade ago. Was that at the back of your mind when you were writing this book?
Well, yes, I was a policeman about 22 years ago, and much more emotional, much more immature than what I am right now, hopefully. But I have learned that to detach the emotion and the passion part of it, because that is counterproductive when it comes to our work here,
Right.
to my work. But yes, the anger still lurks behind. I will be lying if I said that there's no anger. The
Yes.
anger still lurks. And it's important to have that anger behind, because that propels you. That's the engine which drives this whole thing forward.
Right, absolutely. Anger that drives this engine. Very well put, Savio, and Shirish. But Savio, I have to come over to you on this point about Donald Trump just thanked Pakistan today for handing over one terrorist back to them. Do you see this as, you know, a return to the post 9/11 world where Pervez Musharraf would routinely hand over these people to the United States in exchange for some kind of concessions and all, given the fact that they have so many, they have a bewildering array of terrorists and terrorist groups. They can take their pick who they want to pick up and hand over to the United States.
You see, whatever Donald Trump does as far as dealing with terror outfits that are dangerous for America, that's Donald Trump's prerogative. But for us as India, I think the most important aspect for us is to ensure that terror organizations, terrorists that have already inflicted wounds on India, and terrorists that plan to inflict wounds on India are dealt with mercilessly.
Right.
They need to be dealt with absolutely no holds barred.
Yes.
There is no space for terrorism as far as India is concerned. And that is what the codename Lucifer is all about. Codename Lucifer is about a very, very elite group of black op operators that deal with terrorists that have inflicted wounds on India and terrorists that plan to inflict wounds on India. Now, the fact of the matter is, many people talk about, black op operations, and they look at the U.S. with the CIA, they look at Mossad and Israel. But let me tell you, having been a part of the system, that India too has an extremely, extremely intelligent, intelligence organization. They do have a very strong black op operations as well, but we do follow a certain code of ethics as far as dealing with our enemies are concerned.
Right, absolutely.
And what are...
And it's a new India, it seems, Savio, given from what you've been telling us. I'm afraid we're completely out of time here, but Savio and Shirish have a new book out. It's called Codename Lucifer. It's a work of fiction, but it could also be based on fact. Who knows? They're not telling us yet. But thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen, on this News 9 Plus show.